Hi everyone, and welcome back to Tea with D. This is episode number 4. Today we are talking about imposter syndrome, and this is something I recently had to work through and something that regularly comes up for me, but it's definitely a very common human experience. I know for a fact that there's other people that deal with this, so naturally we have to talk about it on Tea with D. So what is imposter syndrome? Well, when I looked up the definition, this is what I got. Imposter syndrome refers to an internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. So this could be related to social status, work background, skill level, degree of experience, a whole bunch of different things. And about 70% of people experience this at one point in their life. So it's actually a very common experience. Now, the term was first used by psychologists Susanna Imes and Pauline Rose Clance in the 1970s. So it's been around for quite a while. Now, just to kind of start this off, I just wanted to share with you my personal experience of imposter syndrome and kind of where it comes from for me. I've definitely experienced imposter syndrome many times in my life, whether it is starting a new job or being in a new situation, a new role is something that usually brings it up for a lot of people. But I've never actually used the term imposter syndrome until recently when I kind of learned about what it was. And I was able to kind of put the words to what I was experiencing just fairly recently. So about, I don't remember what day it was now. I'd have to check my phone, which I don't have on me right now. But fairly recently, I became monetized. My channel is now monetized for Google AdSense. And it was interesting because obviously my first initial reaction was excitement because I've been working so hard. And this was one of the goals that I was working towards. Obviously, there's different milestones that you reach when you're on YouTube and stuff, and it's a lot of work to get there. So I was really excited when I got there. And yeah, the excitement lasted a few hours, but then suddenly I was feeling this negative emotion. I was like, what's going on? Like, I should just be happy. But I started feeling like maybe I'm not worthy of this. Maybe my content isn't that good. Like, maybe people think I'm so much more great than I really am. I started feeling this imposter syndrome that I'm not as competent of creating good quality content as I think I am, or as people think I am. It was a really weird experience. And I'm thinking to myself, like, where is this coming from? Like, I work my butt off all the time. Like, I'm always working on YouTube and people enjoy my content. Like, if people are staying and watching my content, that means they genuinely like it. Like, why can't you accept that? Why can't you believe that? And it definitely comes from a lot of different places for me. I definitely have a history of self-doubt that is rooted in my childhood. We could get into that, but we're not going to today. I'm definitely very much a perfectionist. This was a very interesting emotion. I'm like, okay, like, let's look into this more. Let's talk about it because I can't be the only one. I know I'm not the only one because I've started to have conversations about it with other people. So first of all, I want to talk about the kind of people that tend to have imposter syndrome. And I found a list of characteristics here that kind of go along with imposter syndrome that I found on the internet. And looking at this, I definitely relate to a lot of these. So I don't know about you guys, but let me know in the comments below as I read these off. So one of them is self-doubt. Another one is attributing your successes to external factors. So instead of saying like, oh yeah, like I earned this because I work really hard. Oh, I earned this because of fluke, or I earned this because this person did this, or the situation was set up for me. You don't take credit for your own actions. Instead, you attribute it to something outside of you. Perfectionism is another one. And that is 100% me. Self-sabotage is another one. And then self-criticizing. And there's actually a whole list of them. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you guys want more information on imposter syndrome, I've linked all my resources below in the description box for you guys. So imposter syndrome is definitely associated with anxiety and depression, and it tends to worsen anxiety and may lead to depression because of a feeling of unworthiness, or that feeling of anxiety because you feel like you can't live up to the standards that you've set for yourself or others have set for you. What makes someone become like this? Like, where does this stem from? Well, there's definitely a lot of different ways that this can develop in somebody. So it's not going to be like a one and done, like this is how you develop this. It's going to be very dependent on your personal situation, your family situation, how you were raised, the people that you grew up around, the situations you've put yourself in. It's going to depend on a lot of different factors, but here's some of them that they mentioned on some of the websites that I was looking looking at. So high family pressure is one of them. If you grew up in a family that put a lot of pressure on you to get good grades in school, to be a high achievement person, that could be it. Entering a new role or a new job really triggers this in people because you have so many new things to learn. You're not doing something you're very comfortable with. And I say new job a lot, but it could be so many different things. Like, I definitely know for a fact that new mothers feel this. Like, I've never been a mother, but like, we see this all the time. We see people talk about it. We see it on TV shows, you know, being a new mother or a new dad or whatever, like just a new parent in general, there's definitely going to be some imposter syndrome there because you feel like, can I do this? I don't think I can do this. Like, you've never done it before. So that is definitely a big one. And it also can very much overlap with social anxiety. So if you're someone who already struggles with social anxiety to begin with, chances are you're probably also dealing with imposter syndrome or will have to deal with imposter syndrome at some point because you feel like you got to please the people around you and you may feel incompetent to do that. So that is another thing. So imposter syndrome can be crippling at times. Not only can it create anxiety and more depression, and also sometimes inhibit people from doing things. I mean, I'm definitely one of the people that keep pushing through, and I think it's a lot of my perfectionism. I just have a really strong tendency to want to just constantly accomplish. Perfectionism sometimes manifests in other people in a way that makes them procrastinate because they feel like no matter what they do, it's never going to be good enough. That doesn't manifest that way for me. I'm just very goal driven. So although I don't procrastinate, I'm more prone to burnout because I'm always working, and I have a hard time giving myself a break and stuff. So for me, imposter syndrome doesn't debilitate me. It doesn't stop me from continuing to work on something, but instead it just heightens the anxiety and the depression. So for me, it manifests in that way, but for some people it can manifest in the opposite way. So if you have imposter syndrome and you feel like you're just not competent to complete a task, you may feel like you just shouldn't try at all. You may have these moments where you break down and you have to lie in bed all day and not get anything done because you just feel so crippled by these feelings. So really, it can manifest in so many different ways, and these are just the two extremes. Obviously, it's a continuum. It's going to depend on the person's personal experience. So now we have an idea of what imposter syndrome is, how it manifests, you know, what causes it, that kind of thing. Let's talk about how to cope with it because that's what we all want to know. Some of these are my own personal techniques, and some of these are also solutions that I found online. I'll put all those links below because I didn't write down every single thing, but I did get the main ones here. All right, so this one is mine. Have a conversation with yourself. So don't fight the feelings, instead work through them. I find whenever I try to suppress something or try to ignore something, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger until I have a meltdown. And that is never fun. Although if you need to cry, if you need a meltdown, let it out. So when I had these feelings of imposter syndrome about my YouTube channel when I got monetized, basically I just took a moment to pause, to sit down and be like, this is interesting. Okay, so why am I having these feelings? I basically told myself, Dina, why do you think you're incompetent? You've been doing this for a while now. Your content has clearly gotten increasingly better since you started. Like, I look back on some of my old videos, I'm like, ugh, cringe. Or like some of my old thumbnails, I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, that's not that good. But you start somewhere. And I do see my growth, and I do see that I can continue to grow, and I can continue to put out better and better content. I can see how hard I work. I told myself, I'm like, Dina, you are working on YouTube stuff like hours and hours every single week. And people genuinely love your content. People are staying, people are subscribing, people are commenting, you're having conversations with people. That is a beautiful thing. So why do you think that you're not competent? Why do you think that you don't deserve to be monetized? And again, these stories that I was telling myself, they all come from the same place. They all come from that self-doubt, that perfectionism, that low self-esteem that I dealt with at a young age. It always comes back to there. So then I kind of work through that, and I tell myself, like, that's not where you are anymore. Like, you've grown so much from that. So why are we going back here? So you really need to do that. You need to also assess your abilities. So where your imposter syndrome is telling you, oh, I can't do that, look for reasons why you know that you can. For example, like if you're starting starting a new job and you're like, oh, I can't do this. This is all new to me. I'm like very scared to start this new role. Well, I'm sure you started a new job in the past, or you've been put in a situation that was uncomfortable in the past. Remember that moment. Look back on it and think, wow, I adapted. I'm adaptable. Look back on examples where you were able to adapt. You were able to be competent. Basically give yourself evidence and proof so that you no longer feel this way. So I find, really taking the time to assess these feelings and have a conversation with myself is very therapeutic and very helpful. You can do this with another person too, but if you don't want to, you can definitely do it by yourself. Like I briefly mentioned though, sharing with those close to you is super helpful too. I love to talk about it with my boyfriend because he's like my biggest cheerleader with my YouTube channel. He gives me pep talks like all the time, and like whenever I feel insecure, he's like, Dina, I literally told you that your follower count would like double in this time or something. Like he'll just like, he kind of rubs it in my face too, because he'll be like, didn't I tell you? Aren't you where I told you you'd be? Like, it's so funny. But talking to somebody else to kind of like get you out of that mindset is very helpful too, because sometimes we experience this tunnel vision where we can't see anything else except our own sabotaging thoughts and ideas and stories, but somebody else has a different perspective. So it's really helpful to talk to somebody else that sees what you're doing and sees how hard you're working and sees amazing things that you're accomplishing, and they're not tainted, they're not sabotaged by your thoughts of yourself. Number 3, they suggested on one of the websites that I was looking at was to actually help other people with a similar situation. Turns out when we help other people with similar situations as us, we actually find it easier eventually to work through it ourselves. So it's like you give advice to somebody for something. If you're helping somebody else, eventually you're going to look at yourself and be like, wow, like why don't I ever follow my own advice? Has anyone ever done that before? And it doesn't have to be imposter syndrome specifically, but have you ever given like really good advice to somebody and then you're like, wow, I need to follow that advice? Because I do that a lot. The more you help other people that are in similar situations as you, the easier it is going to be to follow your own advice and work through your own stuff. So that is another suggestion of theirs. The next thing is a big one, and it's to stop comparing yourself to others. And I'm not going to get too much into this because I literally have a video on comparisonitis, which I will link for you on the screen, and I'll link it at the end of this video and in the description box below. But comparisonitis is a big one. If you feel incompetent, but you're watching someone else who is competent and you're comparing yourself, then that's just going to be a downward spiral. And if you need to work through comparisonitis and how to get rid of that, I highly recommend you watching my video on that. Number 5. So this is my personal kind of advice. It can become toxic at times. As I said, I am a workaholic, but one of my techniques is to keep pushing forward and not letting your imposter syndrome hold you back. Because the more you push yourself to step out of your comfort zone, easier it's going to be to step out of your comfort zone more often. Also, the faster you're going to learn this new thing that you feel incompetent at, and the quicker these feelings are going to kind of like go away a little bit. I'm not going to say they're going to go away altogether, but the more you put yourself out of your comfort zone, the easier it is going to get. So for example, like if I didn't put myself out of my comfort zone in the first place, I wouldn't have a YouTube channel. I could have listened to all the stories about how I'm not good enough to have a YouTube channel, how no one will like me. I could have listened to those stories, but I didn't. I pushed myself out of my comfort zone, and now my channel is growing and I love it and I'm proud of it. I enjoy doing it. I wouldn't have all of this if it weren't for me pushing myself out of my comfort zone. So try not to let your imposter syndrome hold you back. Just keep pushing through, keep going with it. Take some time to be kind to yourself and work through those feelings, but also don't let it hold you back. Another big thing they suggested was to separate your feelings from fact, because if you have a history of being a very competent person, being very adaptable, but your feelings are telling you something else, okay, let's separate those. Let's have a conversation with ourselves to separate those, or let's journal through it. Let's write them down. Maybe on one side of the page, you write down your feelings, those negative stories and beliefs that you have about yourself, and then maybe on the other side you counteract those with real facts. And this is a very helpful way to work through this. I've done this myself before. I highly recommend trying it. Another thing that was suggested on one of the websites I looked at was to develop a healthy response to failure and mistake making. This is a big one because if you work on this relationship with failure, it's not going to be as intense when you fail. It's not going to heighten your imposter syndrome as much if you fail. And I don't have the best relationship with failure, but I have been working through that myself, I try to look at failure not as failure anymore, but instead as a lesson. And if you start to look at failure as a lesson in your life, you're not going to have so many regrets. You're not going to be so scared to try new things because of the fear of failure. It's really, really powerful. I like to look back on old situations with that hindsight. There's certain choices that I've made in the past that I'm like, okay, I shouldn't have done that. But the more I look at it, I realize, well, even though that didn't work out, it led me to this other opportunity, which led me to this place, which led me to this place where I'm at right now. And I wouldn't have had this if it weren't for this. And I'm so happy I have this. Like, the more you look back on your life in hindsight like that, you realize like it's almost like these events were meant to be, because if it weren't for that, it wouldn't have triggered something else in your life. So I try to look at things that way, but also every single failure is a lesson learned, and life is all about learning lessons. So that is a really big thing to work on. I highly recommend, really developing a healthier relationship to failure and making mistakes. Another thing that you can do is reward yourself when you did a good job. Make sure you take it in. Make sure you appreciate your successes, especially if it's something that you did that was very out of your comfort zone. You're very nervous about it. Maybe you were experiencing some imposter syndrome. Well, when you do it, when you do a great job, take the time to really take that in. Maybe even write it down, because then in the future, you'll look back on it and be like, oh, well, I got through this. I can get through the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. I'm capable of it. So it's really important to take those moments in. So I'm going to leave it at that, guys, because I don't want this video to be too long. But like I said, I have so many resources in the description box below if you would like to read a little bit more, if you would like to get a little bit extra advice on that. But anyways, thanks so much for watching this video, guys. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, make sure you give it a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. It really helps out my channel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more content like this. I post Tea with D videos about every other week, and I have a whole bunch of other self-improvement, self-love type content, as well as spirituality and witchcraft and other lifestyle content on my channel. So you don't want to miss out on that. I do post videos every single week. I hope you guys have a beautiful day, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.